Abraham, the fire starter.
The priesthood of the temple instigated the masses, burn him alive and uphold your gods if you are going to take any action.
This verse of the Qur'an states that the idol-worshipping pagans of Abraham's nation wanted to burn him. What incensed them was something that Abraham said and did, which means he was responsible for starting the fire. Those steeped in falsehood know what the fairy tales tell us, but here is the tafsir of Ibn Kathir on this verse for a refresher course.
How Ibrahim was thrown into the fire and how Allah controlled it. When their arguments were refuted and their incapability became clear, when truth was made manifest and falsehood was defeated, they resorted to using their power and strength, and said, "Burn him and help your gods, if you will be doing." So they gathered together a huge amount of wood. Asadi said, If a woman was sick, she would make a vow that if she recovered she would bring wood to burn Ibrahim. Then they made a hole in the ground and set it aflame, and it burned with huge sparks and immense flames. There had never been a fire like it. They put Ibrahim, peace be upon him, into a catapult, at the suggestion of a nomadic Kurdish man from Persia, Shu'ayb al-Jabari said, his name was Hazan, and Allah caused the earth to swallow him up, and he will remain sinking into it until the day of resurrection. When they threw him he said, "Sufficient for me is Allah, and he is the best disposer of affairs." This is similar to what al-Bukhari recorded from Ibn Abbas that Ibrahim said, "Sufficient for me is Allah, and he is the best disposer of affairs," when he was thrown into the fire, and Muhammad said it when they said, "Verily, the people have gathered against you, therefore, fear them." But it increased them in faith, and they said, "Allah is sufficient for us, and he is the best disposer of affairs." Sa'id bin Jubayr reported that Ibn Abbas said, when Ibrahim was thrown into the fire, the keeper, angel, of the rain said, "When will I be commanded to send rain?" But the command of Allah was more swift. Allah said, "O fire! Be you cool and safety for Ibrahim," and there was no fire left on earth that was not extinguished. Ibn Abbas and Abu al-Aliyah said, were it not for the fact that Allah said, "and safety," Ibrahim would have been harmed by its coldness. Qatada said, on that day there was no creature that did not try to extinguish the fire for Ibrahim, except for the gecko. Azid Zuri said, the Prophet commanded that it should be killed, and called it a harmful vermin. And they wanted to harm him, but we made them the worst losers. They were defeated and humiliated, because they wanted to plot against the Prophet of Allah, but Allah planned against them and saved him from the fire, and thus they were defeated.
Fire, fire, burning bright, in the sands of a Persian night, what immortal hand or eye could frame such a fairy tale? Not I. We are presented with a fantastic story of worldwide firefighting suppression helped by the animals of a Noah's Ark-esque Steven Spielberg epic. Let's start and look at what was the cause of the pagans' anger and then what the Quran really means. We will use the same logical, rational mind Abraham had and who was not misguided with ancestral false beliefs.
His people argued with him. But Abraham said, "Do you dispute with me about God when he has guided me? I do not fear those you associate with him. Nothing can happen to me contrary to the laws of God. My Lord encompasses all things in his knowledge. Will you not then reflect and use your intellect?" Abraham taught his people to reflect and be rational. He said, "Why should I fear what you set up besides him, when you do not fear to set up besides God deities for which he has sent no authority and are utterly powerless? Think, which of the two sides among us deserves peace and security? Answer me if you have the answer. Those who attain belief and do not confound their belief with falsehood, for them is inner peace and security. They are rightly guided." Zulm, wrong, in this verse, conveys falsehood and shirk. This is the logic, examples of the star, the moon and the sun, that we taught Abraham against his people. Exalt people in ranks when they follow our laws. Your Lord is wise, all-knower. Also mention in the book the story of Abraham. Indeed, he was a man of truth, a prophet. He even confronted his father, "O my father, why do you worship what hears not and sees not and can be of no avail to you? O my father, there has come to me of knowledge that did not come to you. Follow me then, and I will lead you onto a perfect way. O my father, do not serve the Satan, for Satan, selfish desire, is a rebel against the beneficent. O my father, I am afraid that a retribution from the beneficent might overtake you, and you become an ally of Satan." He answered, "Do you dislike my gods, O Abraham? If you cease not, I will certainly get you stoned to death. Now get away from me for good." Abraham said, "Peace be upon you. I will pray to my Lord for your forgiveness, for he is ever kind to me."
Abraham refuted the pagan beliefs and practices, so made enemies. Abraham's own father was thwarted with logic, and he did not take too kindly to this, as stoning a son is not a trifling thing. We are now in a position to look at the verses mentioned at the beginning in context to show what really happened.
This Qur'an is a blessed reminder that we have revealed. Will you then reject it? Long before, we showed Abraham his direction, and we were aware of him, when he said to his father and his people, "What are these images and statues that you sit around worshipping?" They responded, "We found our ancestors worshippers of them." He said, "You and your ancestors have surely been in plain error." They said, "Are you telling us some serious truth, or are you one of those jesters?" He said, "Nay, your Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth, he who brought them into being. I am of those who bear witness before you, on the basis of reason. And by God, I have planned to deal with your idols when you turn back and leave the temple. You will see if those whom you believe to guard you can even guard themselves." Then he broke them to pieces except the big one, so that they might turn to it. They said, "Who has done this to our gods? He must be of the wrongdoers." Some said, "We heard a youth talking about them. He is called Abraham." The custodians of the temple conferred and said, "Then bring him before the people's eyes, so that they might bear witness." And when he came, they asked, "Is it you who has done this to our gods, O Abraham?" "Whoever did it, did it. This is their chief. Ask them, all, if they speak." They were taken aback, withdrew, thought and said to one another, "Surely, you yourselves are the wrongdoers." They were utterly confounded in shame, lowered their heads and said to Abraham, "You know that they do not speak." Abraham said, "Do you then worship instead of God what cannot benefit you or harm you? Shame on you and on all that you worship instead of God. Will you, then, use your sense?" The priesthood of the temple instigated the masses, "Burn him alive and uphold your gods if you are going to take any action." But we said, "O fire, be cool, and security for Abraham." The fire of their rage cooled down, and they schemed against him, but we made themselves the true losers.
Reading the Qur'an is 99% devoid of the Ibn Kathir tales, yet the Qur'an states that it is complete and fully detailed for those who are true, sincere submitters to Allah, so we do not need to know anything more.
Indeed, in the history of these men, there is a lesson for people of understanding. As for this revelation, it could not possibly be a hadith, fabricated. It confirms the surviving truth in the previous scriptures, and gives a detailed explanation of everything. And it is a beacon and mercy for all those who accept it. Gives a detailed explanation of everything.
Where is the thrown into a fire came out alive to show that it happened this way? Nowhere, and you cannot fill in the Quranic gaps, as there are none to be filled unless you are a sectarian, shirk, bid'ah innovator. He was not thrown into a literal fire, but was revelation clever enough to counter the every falsehood the pagan and sectarians could throw at him. And the following, rendered by their meaning rather than a literal translation, sums up what we have learned in this video.
Abraham explained these facts to his people, but their only answer was, slay him or burn him alive, but God saved him from their fiery rage. In this history, there are lessons for believers such as, When people have no sensible answers, they resort to threats and violence. And he said, "You have chosen idols and their priests instead of God, out of regard for your social bonds in this worldly life. But on the resurrection day you will disown one another and curse one another. The fire will be your home, and there will be no helpers for you." To his group of believers, later, belonged Abraham, when he came to his Lord with a noble heart, and thus spoke to his father and his people, "What is it that you worship? It is a falsehood. Do you desire gods besides God? What do you think of the Lord of the worlds?" And he glanced at the stars, and said, "I am sick of you worshipping false deities." At that they turned their backs and moved away from him. Then Abraham gently turned to their idols and said, "What? You do not eat? What ails you that you do not speak?" Then he turned upon them, striking them with the right hand. The people came running to him. He said, "Do you worship what you carve with your own hands? But God has created you and your handicraft." They said, "Build a structure for him and fling him into the blazing fire." But as they schemed against him, we brought them low. And he said, "I am going to my Lord who will guide me best."
The Quran Unchained.